The title of our presentation is Transitioning Portuguese Classes to Virtual Contexts, Challenges and Possibilities. This presentation is part of the L2 Digital Literacies 2020 Symposium, Critical Translation and Dialogue and Virtual Exchange, and this event is hosted by the University of Arizona. Larissa Xavier de Oliveira, Juliana Araújo Ribeiro, and Catarina Teixeira, we are all glad to have this opportunity of sharing this work with you. This presentation aims at describing the challenges and the possibilities when transitioning Portuguese classes to online contexts as Fulbright Foreign Language Teaching Assistants, or FLTAs, and we were teaching Portuguese at Emory University, which is located in Atlanta, Georgia, in the year of 2019-2020, under the supervision of Professor Catarina Teixeira. She is the director of the Portuguese department. I just would like to add that we needed to do these changes, this transition to the online environment due to the coronavirus pandemic. Briefly about the presenters, Larissa Xavier de Oliveira obtained a BA in Portuguese and English teaching from the Federal University of Paraná. Paraná is a state in the south of Brazil, and she completed her MA in Applied Linguistics at the same university last year. In addition, she has been working as a teacher for the past 7 years. Her studies are concentrated on inclusive education by means of digital information and communications technologies. About Juliana Ribeiro. She holds a BA in English teaching from the Federal University of Pará, which is a state located in the northern region of Brazil, in the Amazon. She earned her MA in Applied Linguistics from the same university, investigating the language learning advising service there. Her main research interests include autonomy, motivation, and advising language learning. For the past 3 years, she has worked as an English teacher in public schools, seeking to expand the empowering role education has had in her life. This presentation is organized into the theoretical foundation. Then we'll discuss the challenges and possibilities of transitioning to online classes. We'll present our conclusion and finally our references.
In the dialogical approach, Bakhtin affirms that signs and statements are built from the speech of the other as they orientate and embody themselves among what has been previously said. Resulting from an established interaction of the subjects, dialogism arises from the constant exchange and crossing of statements. Therefore, the dialogical concept relates to subject social positions that are organized through the social-historical relations of the society. According to Bakhtin, speeches manifest themselves through the statements that can be oral and written. As they constitute different discursive practice, these statements reflect the worldview and values of an individual and have a purpose in the social environment. In this case, although the statements are individual, each social sphere requires particular groups of statements that are relatively stable. Considering the dialogical aspect of language teaching needs to be contextualized and have a communicative language function. Given that, in this study, the dialogical conception of language and the acquisition of L2 are both covered. It is understood that, influenced by internal and external factors, second language acquisition may occur inside the classroom as well as outside it. According to Alice, due to the world knowledge and communicative strategies that the speakers acquire in their first language, L1, they use their native language to acquire the second language, L2. Despite the fact that the theory of acquisition of L1 and L2 has a structuralist basis, by arguing that linguistic interactions enables the speaker to acquire language, it opens to the idea that language is the result of the aforementioned. Then, it is constituted through discursive crossings and organized in social historical relations of the community. In this case, interaction and dialogism contribute to the acquisition of L1 and L2 as produced statements are resulting from communication and constituted by intersubjective texts derived from the interaction of people. As the New London Group put it, the globalization and variety of texts circulating in the new information communication technologies, also known as ICTs, created a new profile of individuals. ICTs help different languages and cultures to be disseminated, which results in plural and interrelated texts. This is due to the fact that the globalized profile of contemporary times fragments society and further diversifies culture. For this reason, the London Group has created the concept of multiliteracies. Cope et al. Defined the concept of multiliteracies in two ways. The first definition results from social and cultural and gender issues and concerns the multimodality of communications available in cyberspace, which gives the user access to various forms of text. Through this new paradigm, traditional language teaching is no longer sufficient because with the new demand of modern times, students need to negotiate and understand the different patterns of meaning production coming from different contexts. To the second definition, multiliteracies relate to the fact that writing and reading interact with elements of semiotics, sound, gestural, spatial, and tactile, for example. In this perspective, ICTs are highlighted and mobilized in the classroom because it is through them that multimodal texts can be worked on, can establish connections with today's media. Therefore, the New London Group argues that one is member of various identity spheres and different communities. Consequently, language teaching focused only on standard language does not correspond to the multiplicity of discourses circulated in a globalized society. For the group, multiliteracies complement the existing literacy pedagogy. In this sense, New London Group and Cope et al. Use the term multiliteracies to discern it from literacy. Multiliteracies are neither limited to linguistic representation nor to the pedagogy of multiliteracies. Instead, it is grounded in practices that change according to culture and context. For the group, of multimodality has a cognitive, cultural, and social aspect that establishes new forms of languages rewritten by language users connected to social networks. Such an approach benefits a reflective look in L2 teaching. According to the New London Group, literacy pedagogy has traditionally been limited to teaching formal writing and reading. For researchers, the approach is restricted because it does not work with linguistic variations in different cultures, so this type of literacy only addresses issues considered standard in a community. Still, for the New London Group, in a scenario of language exchange and globalization, it is necessary that one understands the differences present in the various existing cultures and use multiliteracies to act as citizens. The group affirms that for this to happen effectively, being able to interact through a variety of language styles, including different ways of speaking English, is necessary. In this sense, speakers can break barriers imposed by culture and engage in discursive practice that they have affinity with. In this paradigm, learning about cultural hybridization, the social context of discourse production, and the regional and ethnic dialectics that encompasses discursive communities, students have access to civic pluralism that, differently from monocultural and nationalistic civic sense, values the different identities. In this conception, students would have the opportunity to develop the ability of critically reflect on complex systems of interaction. Through immersion, the reflective approach unites concept and practice, which means that, from a prior knowledge, new concepts and experiences are constructed. In other words, in this methodology, there is a reciprocal connection between what students learn and what they experience in their reality. For this to be possible, the teacher needs to reflect on the different ways of teaching and the reflective approach. This means that throughout the didactic planning process, it is necessary to reflect on which pedagogical approach is the most appropriate to its context and that will contribute most to the teaching learning process. That is, students learning the terms, the sequence of the classes.
So now I'm going to talk about this transition to the online environment. So I'm going to talk about some challenges that we had to face in this process. And these were the questions that we had to reflect upon, that we had to come up with solutions for. And it's important to tell you that Larissa and I, we were teaching in-person classes in the spring of 2020. I was teaching Portuguese 110, she was teaching Portuguese 102. And during the spring break, we were told that we would not go back to the classrooms, and we needed to make changes. And which were these questions? So first of all, we had to think of what would we do with the learning goals of the course, considering that the course was supposed to be in person. It was supposed to last for a certain period of time, and that time has changed. Besides that, we had to reflect on what would be relevant to be learned in the face of what we were living. How would we assess the students in the new contexts? Would they be required to complete the same tasks from before the spring break? How would the interaction be promoted under the new circumstances? And how would attendance be considered if the students will be working different time zones? So these were some of the concerns, and we had a dialogue with our supervisor, with the other colleagues and peers, and also with the other departments. And I'm going to present to you some of the strategies and possibilities that the online environment has brought to us. So what were these strategies and possibilities we found out? Content, curriculum, tasks, and assessment, they had to be simplified in the sense that we didn't want to overwhelm students even more. There was a lot of things happening to all of us, so we understood that we had to make it more simple. And we also had to adapt to the features the platforms offer, and that meant that we also had to learn about online platforms that we had never used before. And we understood that for us, it would be more relevant that students could have activities done in their own time, even because there were students that they did not have reliable internet connection, or they were in a very different time zone. Therefore, attendance and deadlines were more flexible. We were more flexible about them. And some of the platforms used were Canvas, Google Docs, and Zoom. So one of our first steps was to send a form that we called Access to Technology form. And in fact, it went beyond checking if they would have access to a computer or if they had reliable internet connection. But we wanted to understand their context, the context that they would be facing in the coming months. So we asked where they would be living, and what time would be there, if they would be able to work without interruptions, if they had a quiet space, and how they felt about this process of transitioning to remote learning. And finally, if they wanted us to know about their own situation and how they felt regarding the current moment we were dealing with. Another change that we had to make was related to the students' activities manual. So before, students would submit their self-corrected workbook for every lesson they studied, and we would check if they had completed, if they had not realized any mistake. And then we understood that that would be not possible in this online environment. We could not ask them to take like 10 to 15 pictures of their workbook and send to us via email. So we decided to think of a tool that could help them to do it individually and still reflect on what they were doing. So we created this self-assessment form. So I'm gonna mention the 3 questions that we created. So the first one is how they would evaluate their own performance. The second one in that lesson, and the second one, which topics they found the most and the least difficult. And finally, what were the type of mistakes they had made. So they would say what kind of mistake there was, and they would give one example of that mistake, and they would correct it. So that was a very important strategy, and it helped them to become more active towards what they were doing, towards their own learning, and also it helped us to plan for the coming classes, because it guided us, it could guide our own practice. Another adaptation we had to make was related to extra activities. Throughout the semester, students are supposed to participate in 5 extracurricular activities beyond the classroom. So the idea is engaging students in moments of Portuguese learning, in moments in which they learn more about Lusophone culture too. So one example of that was participating in conversation clubs. But since there were no longer in-person events, we had to come up with another idea, and we thought about something that they could do by themselves. So, for instance, watching a movie or watching a TV series. So our first strategy was to make a list of suggestions of things that they could watch on Netflix, on YouTube, on Amazon Prime, and other platforms for streaming movies and videos. Then we also made a program activity report. So we would ask them to describe what they watched or they listened to, choose a word, a new word for them, the meaning, and write it in a sentence. Make a transcription of a sentence that they heard and comment on a cultural aspect that they observed. And the most interesting is that students just did not necessarily follow this list, but they come up with other ideas that we hadn't suggested. For instance, one student mentioned that they called a relative that they had never spoken to in Portuguese, but then they decided to have this conversation and they described that and they made that their extra activity. Another example was a student who asked for a delivery of coxinhas, which is a typical Brazilian food, and he researched about that and he described at that moment. So this is another example of one activity that can help students to become more active towards their learning process. So here you see some images from the Bate-Papo Virtual, which would be our adaptation to our weekly conversation club in Portuguese. Since we were not able to meet in person any longer, we decided to make our conversation club, but online. And I would like to say that I believe one of the strengths of the Portuguese program at Emory University is related to how they help students to engage in activities beyond the classroom time. And that's so important because it helps to create this sense of community. And feeling part of a community is so important in this process of learning a language, because it helps you to keep motivated, to keep on going to classrooms, to feel welcome and to feel comfortable. So this Bate-Papo Virtual, this online conversation club, it helped also to expand our learning community. So technology made it possible. And 2 of the events that we hosted actually was we invited special guests and we helped establish this dialogue, and that would not be possible because they were in different parts of the world. So the first one on the left is related to projects of documentation of Brazilian indigenous languages. And we had with us 2 researchers, Camille Miranda and Arthur Gonçalves. And Arthur is an indigenous researcher. So students were able to listen to and to talk with someone who researches and also comes from that specific community. Another special guest was João, and he has worked for the past years as a public school teacher in Brazil. So he talked to us his experience and about the projects that he developed. So it also gave learners more insights on public education in the Brazilian context. So here you can see the pictures of the bate-papos virtuais. And I would say that the community just expanded, technology made it possible, and even alumni, students that were part of the program before, they could connect and share their experiences with the new students. So these are our final remarks. First of all, our lives have changed significantly due to the coronavirus outbreak. Suddenly, teachers and students had to transition from in-person classes to virtual ones. As Fulbright foreign language teaching assistant, it was no different. So video conferencing, remote teaching, synchronous and asynchronous online classes then became this unexpected reality to which we had to adapt. And we highlighted the word adapt because that's much related to what our new routine, right? Readapting, relearning, learning new things. Finally, teaching online demanded reevaluating course content, goals, and curriculum. And that online environment also brought new possibilities, which were made possible when we consider the affordance of online spaces. These opportunities that the online spaces and the online tools can also offer us.